Please remember to click the like, subscribe and the notification bell. It really does help Tea with a Tally to keep theatre alive.
Look, can I just start by saying it wasn't my fault? Oh, I know I've got a really bad press over the years. All of us have. But what do you expect when you're born and brought up in the northern reaches where for weeks, even months on end, there's no night, so nobody gets a good night's sleep? I was the youngest, the smallest, and, well, the ugliest. Now, you'd have thought in my culture that'd be an advantage, but it wasn't really. You're just one of so many ugly faces in the crowd, and being the smallest, I was always being pushed and shoved out the way, trampled on, squashed face first into the mud and snow. And, being the smallest, I missed most of what was being said. There was a constant noise above me, above my head. All I've heard all of my life was, "Get out the way, shorty," or "Move, shrimp," usually just before I found myself heading towards the ground. What I yearned for was peace and quiet, a place where I could be on my own and be the biggest person around. I've never been able to stand noise.
I do know what people say, have said, still say, but it really wasn't my fault. It wasn't, all right. Well, I suppose you could say I had a pretty happy, normal childhood in an obscure, out-of-the-way, small castle in some remote, far-flung corner of... Well, that's not really important, is it? You're not that interested in my background, are you? Oh, well, I was the youngest of 4 girls. My 3 older sisters were so much prettier than me. Or so my father kept telling me. "Why, oh, why did I get girls?" he'd say. "I wanted a son to be my heir, take my title, but no, 4 girls to marry off to safeguard my lands." My older sisters were blondes or brunettes, or, to be honest, I can't remember them. And they were all dutifully married off to Prince this, the Duke of that, and the mighty overlord of wherever, and I never saw them again. I was, at last, according to my father, found to be worthy of marriage to some Eastern potentate. So I was shipped off, miles and miles from my home to the other side of the world, and married to someone old enough to be my grandfather. And I wasn't even the principal wife. I was one of many. I was the 28th wife and lived in a harem with all the others, and every single one of them was so much prettier than me. I was 11 years old.
Look, I know I come across as confident and everyone's friend, and really, I was only a bit player in what was going on. What I did got blown up out of context. Truly, honestly, it wasn't my fault. I had the sort of upbringing that any father would want for his son, his only son, his pride and joy. I learned how to use a bow about the same time I started to walk. Then a knife, and I soon learnt how to use that. I could knock a squirrel out of a tree before I was 4. At 9, I got my first axe, had my first pickaxe at 11, had my first beer at 12, and had my first girl at 13. Dad were right proud of me. I grew tall and I grew strong, and I knew my way about the mountains and valleys around our village. The only thing I wasn't any good at but my dad said it didn't matter because I could do everything else, was schooling. Who needs to read and write when you can hunt and shoot and kill and drink and enjoy the ladies? And I did. Every girl in the village from 14 to 40. Well, almost every girl. There were just that one. The one I really wanted.
As soon as I could, I moved away from there. Moved south, where it actually went dark at night time. But, of course, my face came with me, and away from my own kind I stood out. People screamed. They ran away. They threw things. So I looked for somewhere to live away from humanity. Humans. Humans can be so cruel. We can smell you from miles away, they shouted. Go and wash, they'd scream. And then they'd laugh and run away. Unless they were already running away screaming in fear because they bumped into me unexpectedly. And the noise of the screaming and the laughing bounced around in my head and it gave me headaches. Then I found a cave. Oh, and it was heaven. It was dark and it was private and it had a little stream that ran nearby and I had a bath every day just in case someone came by unexpectedly. They never did, of course, because I made sure nobody knew I was there. Oh, I wasn't lonely. Don't get me wrong. I don't want sympathy. I had friends. Lots of friends. There were badgers and hedgehogs and deer and the birds, and none of them seemed to bother about how I smelled or looked. When it got really cold in the winter, some of them even moved in with me. I didn't bother them, and they didn't bother me. And it was all going so well until they turned up. How could they have been so rude, so uncaring, and so... Well, the smell. It was awful. It really made me think, is that what I smell like to humans? And no manners whatsoever, none. To-ing and fro-ing from the stream to my cave and back as if they owned the place. And the noise they made. I imagine it's what a barrel full of marbles must sound like if you throw it down the side of a mountain. The noise and the smell were too much, and I had to leave. I had to leave my beautiful, idyllic home and find somewhere else. I've hated goats ever since.
5 years I endured being one of many. 5 years of being told that I should be grateful, that he'd only married me as a favour to my father, and how all the other wives were so much prettier than me. The other women were mean and horrible to me. The courtiers looked down their noses at me, the eunuchs sniggered behind their hands, and the guards were always a little sloppy at standing to attention as I walked past. My only friend was a little blind girl who worked for the alchemist. It was her job to grind up the herbs and the poisons and the other ingredients that went into the medicines for the royal household. She was excellent at her job, but then she'd learned the hard way. She'd got something wrong, and the gases and smoke that arose from one of the concoctions made her lose her sight. A mistake she never made again. We were close in age, so we chatted as she worked, and I watched. She told me what the medicines were for and what was in them, what to be careful to use, what to use sparingly, and what not to use, ever. And I listened, and I remembered. And then a miracle. My tired, elderly, wizened, disgusting brute of a husband died. It was a short illness, but very, very painful. None of the medicines that the alchemist and his assistant provided could cure him, and he died in agony. People said it was because he ate too many apples. Who knows? The new ruler wasn't interested in the dead ones' wives. Well, not all of them. And I was one of the ugly ones packed off to new husbands. I pleaded to be allowed to go home to my own land and to my father, but no, my father was too ill, my sisters were too busy, so I was sent even further away and found myself married to a pleasant but totally uninterested groom of lowly rank, but with aspirations to become a wizard. A wizard? Is it too much to ask that I find happiness? Oh, he gave me whatever I wanted. Money, jewels, fine clothes. I just had to stay out of his way. I was not to distract him from his studying. So I spent hours, days, weeks exploring his old rambling castle. And then one day, in a dusty room under a sheet, I found a large mirror.
She wouldn't look twice at me. She crossed the street to avoid me. She'd always have an excuse. It's getting late. I must get back. Father will be worried. And she'd smile, a sort of crooked, mocking smile, and be on her way. How could she not see what were right in front of her? I was the handsomest man in the village. The tallest, the best shot, and all the girls wanted me. Except her. Everyone knew to stay away from that place. No one would go near. They were all terrified. Well, except me, obviously. I'd been right up to the chained and padlocked gates and shaken them and challenged the occupants to come out and face me. But nothing. Silence. At night, even I wouldn't go near. Such terrible noises, sometimes you wondered what was going on. But her? Ha! There was that fateful day when dear Daddy got lost in the fog and the rain and the mist and somehow, God knows how, found himself at the actual door of the castle. And within minutes, a prisoner, only freed when promising to send the next living thing he saw to take his place. And it should have been his dog or a cow or the village idiot, but no, it was her. It was her! And before anyone knew, she'd gone. Gone to the castle to act as prisoner in her father's place. She were meant for me. She was mine. And now she'd gone to who knew what. And life in the village carried on and no one missed her. Except me. So I went to find out what were going on. I climbed the trees, I scaled the walls, I peered through the gates and I saw nothing for weeks. And then, it was such a glorious sight. I saw her again, alone in the garden picking roses. She was distracted, I could tell her. She was looking round, glancing over her shoulder, turning her head this way and that. And then she stopped looking. She saw. And the most beautiful smile I've ever seen appeared on her face. It was the sort of smile that should have been for me, but it wasn't. It was for... Well, what was it? It wasn't a man. It was an it. It was a vile, deformed, cursed creature. It was a beast.
I kept on the move, going east until I came to the mountains. The scenery was breathtaking. The air was fresh. There were crystal clear streams of water, and there were hardly any people. No name-calling. No throwing of rocks. No noises in my head. There were cows with their cowbells, but they were somehow melodic and soothing. There were sheep. Not the brightest of creatures, but they kept themselves to themselves. I knew there were goats around. I could smell them. Smell them. Disgusting, stinking creatures. I could see them on the side of one of the mountains. 3 of them, miles and miles away, but I could still smell them. So I moved on, further into the mountains. I walked for days, and then, just as I was about to give up, I came across the most amazing ravine. A split between the mountains, like someone had taken a knife to the ground and sliced it deep. And a stream tumbled and gurgled at the bottom. And over the ravine was a quaint, if somewhat old and rickety bridge. But I was home. I would live under the bridge, in peace and solitude for the rest of my days, listening to the water tumbling over the rocks and watching the clouds drifting by overhead. I smelt them. I smelt them before I saw them. 3 of them, in different sizes, bleating and smelling and clip-clopping over the rocks with their solid, ugly hooves. And all of them making their way towards my bridge. I was out and up onto the bridge in a flash. "Bugger off!" I shouted. "Go and smell and bleat and clip-clop somewhere else." But no. They wanted the grass on the other side of the bridge, said it would be sweeter, and his littlest one made its way across the bridge, my bridge. I'd had enough. I saw red. I was going to eat the little bugger before he put one step in front of another, but he said, and I must say for a goat he sounded quite reasonable, that the next goat was bigger and would be more tasty. So I'll let him pass. The next one tried and said to me, "Look at the one that's left. He's huge. He'll feed you for a week." Well, that seemed reasonable too, so I let him cross. The last one, the biggest one, he didn't even give me time to open my mouth. He just charged, full pelt, and we met in the middle. There was a scuffle. He caught me off guard, right in the chalky deposits. That took the wind out of my sails, I can tell you. And I toppled backwards and went through the railings, grabbing at struts on the way down. And just as the biggest and smelliest goat made it over, the whole wretched bridge collapsed and landed on top of me at the bottom of the ravine. They were stuffed though, stuck on that side of the ravine for the rest of their days. And me? Well, the trail goes cold there. Most people reckon that it was over for me. Well, maybe it was. And maybe it wasn't. But I will say this. It wasn't my fault.
I was only with the wizard for 2 years. Oh, yes, he became the wizard he wanted to be, and he'd probably have gone on to be a very famous wizard indeed, if he hadn't died after eating all those apples. So there I was, a widow again. Only this time I had a mirror, a magic mirror, one of my late husband's early experimental spells that he'd got bored of as he couldn't see the true potential of it. Magic mirrors have to be treated in a very particular way. I learned that through trial and error. But if you ask the right questions, use the right phrases, not only are your wishes granted, but you hear exactly what you want to hear. And when I looked in the mirror, I saw the most beautiful woman in the world staring back at me, and the mirror assured me that I would always be the most beautiful woman in the world. Not long after my husband died, I had word that my father's illness had finally got the better of him, and he too had died. His successor, a distant cousin of mine, inherited, and I went back for the coronation. I was welcomed with open open arms by him and his wife, his very pregnant wife. I was family. I was made welcome. 2 weeks after the coronation, a girl child was born. It was a difficult birth, but I did my duty. I never left the Queen's side. I mopped her brow, I held her hand, I fed her little pieces of apple. She died. The King was distraught. I soothed him and he rallied. We were married a month later. Scandalous, some people said, but the gossip soon turned to sympathy when he died in my arms at the wedding breakfast. Guilt at marrying so soon, some people said. Not a strong constitution in the first place, said others. So many theories. Luckily, no one thought to examine the apple pies. So there I was, Queen Regent, ruling in my own country, the most beautiful woman in the world. Of course, now I regret not paying any attention to the squalling brat in the nursery. And apple puree is so good for babies. But I don't need to go on, do I? You know the rest. The winners write the history books, don't they? Those on the losing side get a very bad press. I am and always will be the wicked queen, won't I? I do have a name, you know. I always did, but no one ever thought to use it. I'm Grimhilda, Queen Grimhilda. And now, having heard my story, I'm sure you'll agree when I say it wasn't my fault.
Her face lit up. The thing looked puzzled, and I felt a cold hand of ice grip my heart. There was a pit in my stomach, a quickening of my blood, and I just knew that all I had to do to break the spell she was under was to kill the beast. Now, I wasn't stupid enough to think that I could do it on my own. I'd need help. On my way back to the village, I formed a plan. Muddied myself up a bit, tore my shirt, dragged my arm through some brambles until it looked like I'd been clawed, and the rest were easy. I galloped into the village, slumped over my horse's neck for effect, and said how I'd tried to rescue this poor, innocent girl from the clutches of a savage beast. I'd never lost a fight before, so the people were shocked. I said he was stronger than anything I'd ever encountered before, and that it would need every single one of us to storm the castle, kill the beast and his henchmen, and free the girl. Well, of course they fell for it, hook, line and sinker. As night fell, armed with flaming torches and carrying every conceivable weapon the village could muster, we set off up the mountain toward the castle. Under a concerted attack from the mob, the gates soon buckled and fell back, and we charged in. "Sack the castle!" I shouted, "but leave the beast for me." It was on a large balcony that I found him, the beast. He came at me with a roar, his claws flashing. I had my sword. We fought, we struggled and we tumbled. He snapped my sword, raised his paw to strike me dead, and then he stopped. She were there, pleading with him not to kill me. She loved me. While the creature was distracted, I reached for my dagger and plunged it straight into his heart. There was a cry like I've never heard before, and in his final death throes, he struck me hard with the back of his paw. I went backwards, fell, hit my head, and everything went black. When I awoke, she was standing over me, mopping my brow. Beside her stood what can only be described as a god. There was a radiance about him, and he had an arm around her shoulder. I tried to speak. I wanted to tell her something. What was it? It came to me. I opened my mouth and croaked, "It wasn't my fault."